Hi, my name is Andy, and I am an extrovert. I feel sometimes I should begin committee meetings with that confession, as opposed to introverts who tend to reflect for a while about what they say. I and my more extroverted pals sometimes process things aloud. In a recent meeting, I said, "Please don't leave saying we've decided to do this. I just wanted to process it with you for a while." Of course, as Swiss psychologist Carl Jung reminded us, there is no such thing as a pure extrovert or a pure introvert. He said, such a man would be in the lunatic asylum. Garrison Keillor often talks about having grown up in the upper Midwest, where the introverts look at their shoes and the extroverts look at your shoes. There are gradations along the spectrum of introversion and extroversion. Last time I was tested, I scored 94th on the extroversion percentile. But I've always loved to steal away with a good book, just not for very long, and sometimes in a coffee shop or a mall or a bookstore. None of us is 100% either. Most of us trend one way or the other. Susan Cain talks about some of the characteristics of introverts and extroverts in her, I think, 2 or 3-year-old book, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. She writes, extroverts tend to tackle assignments quickly. They make fast, sometimes rash decisions and are comfortable multitasking and risk-taking. They enjoy the thrill of the chase for rewards. Introverts often work more slowly and deliberately. She makes introverts sound a lot better than extroverts in her book, by the way. I don't know that I buy all of it. They like to focus on one task at a time, introverts, and can have mighty powers of concentration. They're relatively immune to the lures of wealth and fame. She continues, our personalities also shape our social styles. Extroverts are people who will add life to your dinner party and laugh generously at your jokes. They tend to be assertive, dominant, and in great need of company. Extroverts think aloud and on their feet. They prefer talking to listening, rarely find themselves at a loss for words. This is getting a little personal. And occasionally blurt out things they never meant to say. They're comfortable with conflict, but not always with solitude. Introverts, in contrast, may have strong social skills and enjoy parties and business meetings, but after a while, they wish they were home in their pajamas. They prefer to devote their social energies to close friends, colleagues, and family. They listen more than they talk, think before they speak, and often feel as if they express themselves better in writing than in conversation. They tend to dislike conflict. Many have a horror of small talk. I see it in your eyes when I come at you, but enjoy deep discussions. Adam McHugh wrote a book called Introverts in the Church. He said, we introverts don't avoid social situations like we would a trip to the dentist, but sometimes we avoid them like we might avoid exercise because we lack the energy for it. Long periods without quiet refueling leave introverts feeling physically exhausted and emotionally hollow, end quote. He said that while introverts are fed from springs deep within themselves, extroverts are like a reservoir that relies on rainfall for water. Despite the obvious gifts introverts offer society, in large part, Western culture privileges extroversion over introversion. As Cain said, introversion, along with its cousins sensitivity, seriousness, and shyness, is now a second-class personality trait, somewhere between a disappointment and a pathology. Introversion has given and continues to give us great gifts if we can sit still long enough to receive them. But the depth of the Western preference for extroversion is stunning. In 2004, the Journal of Psychology and Theology published an article entitled Students' Perceptions of Jesus' Personality as Assessed by Jungian Type Inventories. Take a moment. The study was conducted by Dr. Susan Howell, professor of psychology at Campbellsville University, which is a small Christian liberal arts school in Kentucky. Dr. Howell used the Myers-Briggs type indicator and the Keirsey temperament sorter, and had students rate Jesus' personality along several lines based on their perceptions of him from their readings of the Christian Gospels. One discovery was that the students in several categories thought Jesus was pretty much just like them, or that they were pretty much just like Jesus, I don't know. 83% of students said they were closer to the feeling side, and 87% rated Jesus a feeler. 83 and 87, almost the same. But the one area in which students surprised those folks who conducted the study was in the introversion-extroversion scale on the Myers-Briggs inventory. 54% of the students who took the inventory were extroverts. 54% were extroverts, close to even. 97% rated Jesus an extrovert. Even the introverts thought Jesus must have been an extrovert. Dr. Howell wrote in her analysis, the perception of an extroverted Jesus might reflect a tendency within American culture to value extroversion over introversion. If one assumes extroversion to be better, one might conclude that Jesus, whom most of these students believe to be the perfect human being, would have been an extrovert. The study caught my eye because I don't think the Gospels support that view of Jesus necessarily. Yes, as the stories go, Jesus was often surrounded by crowds. Yes, he was a teacher who loved having people close to him. But he also repeatedly took breaks to get away from the crowds and pray. He spent 40 days in the desert. He borrowed a boat to go out to sea to get away from the crowds, for God's sakes. Maybe literally. It seems likely these students were influenced by the Western preference for extroversion. Yet, another 2003 study indicated that introverts may actually make up about 51% of the population. We may be just about evenly divided. But we have idealized the extreme extrovert, someone who can get out there and sell. The 20th century saw what Kane calls the rise of the mighty likable fellow. We're told voters want a president they could see having a beer with, though they have a better chance of experiencing an Arizona hurricane. But while Western culture may overvalue extroversion, most of the world's great religions point us toward the value of introversion and introspection. There's an ancient Eastern story of a student who traveled a long way to sit with her master. The student wanted to learn a practice that the master specialized in. So the student arrived at the master's home and was welcomed inside for tea. Immediately upon sitting down at the table, the student began going on and on about all the things he knew, the masters he had sat under, the scriptures he had learned, all his conquests of mind and spirit. On and on and on. The master quietly picked up the teapot. She began to pour tea into the verbose student's cup. She poured until the cup was halfway full, still talking, and 3/4 full, still talking, completely full. Finally, the tea ran out of the cup and flowed onto the table, down onto the floor, and the student stopped his soliloquy finally and screamed, "Stop! Can't you see what you're doing?" The master said, "Your mind is like this teacup. Before I can place anything inside, you need to empty it." Meditation, prayer, these are practices to help us build what maybe we could call introspective muscles. This could do us some good. Unitarian Universalism is such a chatty faith. Words and thoughts are very important to us. I worry that sometimes our meetings become contests to see who can put forward the best idea most aggressively, talking over one another. Extrovert dreams, introvert nightmares. What happens in a setting like that to people who prefer to carefully consider what they'll say, who prefer to wait for just the right moment to engage? Often I'm afraid we don't get to hear the most carefully formed opinion in the room. That's part of the reason I like chalice circles, the spirituality small groups here at VUU. On surveys administered to folks who have been through chalice circles, some people who are obviously extroverts, it seems to me, have confessed that at first they really had trouble listening to other people without interrupting. But once they settled in, they found that listening and being listened to deeply can be rewarding. In these circles, we build introspective muscles. And I think introverts can build extroverted muscles too, maybe. We sometimes say here that we're all on the welcome committee. We should all be kind and gracious when people come through our doors. We're inviting people into our faith home, after all. Saying hello and asking if you can be of any help doesn't require a great excitement to meet a new person. And you don't have to stand and small talk with people like me for 20 minutes to be welcoming either. For my part, I'm getting better at discerning when my small talk is exhausting some poor person who wants nothing more than just to go sit down and be quiet. Are any of my fellow extroverts on that journey? I won't make you raise your hand someday. Yeah. Right, yeah. Melissa says I'm an extrovert. I wanted to raise my hand. But while we may be able to build some practices that help us either better navigate social situations or spend more time reflecting, we probably cannot change our tendency. It is most likely deeply rooted in us. We can do some hard work maybe and change some things, but we're likely all bound by what Kane calls the rubber band theory of personality. We are elastic and can stretch ourselves, but only so far. Some scientists believe that extroversion is most evident in America and Europe, which are traditionally migratory populations. They say it would make sense that nomads would need to be extroverted, would need to be able to quickly meet new people, while people who typically stay home don't need to develop such a trait. Maybe. If that trait is so deep within us, though, how likely is it that we can change it? Indeed, why would we want to? Harvard psychologist Jerome Kagan successfully predicted which 4-month-olds, with a high degree of accuracy, which 4-month-olds would develop into introverted and extroverted adolescents. Temperament seems to be with us early. Speaking in brain language, some scientists say if your amygdala is highly active when you meet a stranger, chances are that may always be the case for you, especially in stressful situations. But that very trait lends some incredible gifts that we extroverts often envy and that the world benefits from. So I say let's give up on trying to make extroverts introverts or introverts extroverts. Instead, let's cultivate a culture in which the gifts of each of these personality types are valued. The key to community in those personality types may be empathy. We extroverts, whom I said to a few folks earlier this week, are like puppies who've just found their tails when we meet a new person. Might do well to approach new folks with joy, but gently. And introverts, those of us who expend energy when we're in a crowd, can be welcoming without having to stand around for excessive small talk. Kane writes, we should actively seek out symbiotic introvert-extrovert relationships in which leadership and other tasks are divided according to people's natural strengths and temperaments. The most effective teams are composed of a healthy mix of introverts and extroverts, studies show, and so are many leadership structures. And she asks us to consider the partnership between Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. She says a formidable orator refusing to give up his seat on a segregated bus would not have had the same effect as a modest woman who would clearly prefer to keep silent but for the exigencies of the situation. And Parks didn't have the stuff to thrill a crowd if she'd tried to stand up and announce that she had a dream. But with King's help, she didn't have to. May each of us know, whatever our personality type, that we're valued, that there's a place for us in our faith home. May we each be blessed enough to find that home here. May strong partnerships develop on our various teams and committees to better serve this congregation and the world. You are a blessing. You are loved. Amen.